Jonathan Moore.
Why are you here?
Did you kill someone?
Oh, did someone break your heart?
Did you break my heart, Marion?
And everyone, we are here with Sera Gamble, just a writer, producer, TV extraordinaire. I'm just going to say savants, TV savant. Sera Gamble here. Sera, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to the Front Row Network on NPR Illinois today.
Thank you. That was a lovely intro. I appreciate it.
Well, I got to tell you, like, this is so like surreal for me because it's like your name always like is just emblazoned to me in my mind because my dad got me into Supernatural, and when I had that, I don't know why, but every time an episode of Supernatural was starting, I would always like fixate on your name when it came up. I don't know why. It was like I never remember anybody else's, never like the director or anything like that. But for some reason, when Sera Gamble's name was there, I always remember it. And I was just like, this is so strange to me. And then, obviously this opportunity came up. I was like, yes, please, I need to talk to this woman. You've just been emblazoned in my mind.
Thank you. It's either because I spell Sarah a little weird or because there just weren't that many women on that show. You're like, weird, a girl.
I'm gonna go with option A there because it's a lot better. But yeah, I'm just so excited to talk to you. Obviously, a lot of things to talk about, especially with You season 4 coming up for Netflix. And man, I'm gonna get your thoughts because that show is so like binge worthy. It just gets under your skin, but so to speak. But before we get into any of that, we always like when new people come on the Front Row Network just to kind of learn a little about them. So as I always ask it, the superhero origin story of Sera Gamble. She goes from born human being to producer, writer extraordinaire. How did you get going? How did you get started in the business?
I was always kind of an artist. I knew that even as a very young child, probably because I was a weird kid, very angsty, a little bit hyper observant. And so I don't know. I was never not that person who kind of wanted to write extra when you got a creative writing assignment. I didn't actually know that TV writing was a thing. When I started, I was writing screenplays for features. And it was around that time that HBO was putting out some really incredible shows. 6 Feet Under is the show that made me very interested in television in the early aughts, because I think it sort of took the place of those indie films in the 90s that made me want to write movies. So I was fortunate to, my then writing partner and I made the finals of a reality TV script competition called Project Greenlight.
Project Greenlight, yes, I remember it well.
So, which was also on HBO. And that means that my first ever movie pitch was on national television, and I was pitching to Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Yeah. Woo, okay. So I remind myself of that when I go in to pitch to the presidents of streamers now. I'm just like, you know what? It's fine. Ben Affleck was at your first pitch. If you made it through that without dying, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, you're going to be fine.
And I think we ended up in the perfect position, which is that we were on TV for about 3 minutes, and then we lost the competition, and then we could just sort of gossip about it with people. So we got a lot of meetings, and the agent from UTA, Sue Nagel, who went on to become a great producer, she suggested to us that we write some TV specs. She was like, TV is where it's all happening quickly. Feature development is slow. You might work for a really long time on something that you never get to see shot. But if you're on a staff, they're going to shoot what you write. And that was incredibly attractive to me. So that's my origin story. I didn't know if it would work out. The idea of being in a room full of writers, none of that is intuitive when you're a writer. I thought of writing as like, I go into a room, I close the door, and I tear my hair out until it's done.
Right.
But I have to say it's pretty fun to be in a writer's room. Turns out collaboration is fun. Who knew?
Oh yeah, I'm big on collaboration myself as well in everything that I do, because just company is more fun. But especially when you're creating art, like you said, like more eyeballs usually make better products, right? Like they think of something that you might not have thought of. And so I think that I'm right there on that wavelength with you there too. And I do love how you mention TV, like right around then, just like it starts blowing up. Like I was talking with my wife the other day about, like how it used to be where like movie actors would never do television series. Like it's like a taboo sin. And now it's like there is no line there anymore. It's just like TV has really, I don't know, like kind of leveled up with the movies because of streamers in development. Like, and so what was like, you've kind of been there for that whole process. Like, is that something that you've been starkly noticing as well?
Certainly. I have a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to snobbery, where it actually makes me want to lean in and examine the thing that people are being snobby about. And when I started in television, that was television. And turns out it was nonsense. Some of the best storytelling of the last 10, 20 years has been on TV, for sure. And I think that the idea, I remember when it seemed risky that like David Duchovny would play himself on an episode of a television show, or that being John Malkovich would exist as a do you remember that, where it was like, don't play yourself, don't lean into celebrity? It was just a different time. I think our perception of actors is that they should be famous in a more mysterious way. But now that all privacy and mystery is dead, thanks to social media, now that just the criteria for interacting with the public is totally different, I just think people don't feel like they have to do that as much. Most actors feel like they don't. And the opportunity to play really meaty roles that you can hold on to for a little while, you can evolve and develop. And then if you're Kate Winslet, you only have to do one season, and then you can go, you just go, you be brilliant, and then do something else. I think there's a lot to recommend it for actors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said there about like how stories can just develop, like a lot of times with movies, we're so condensed in the time that we have that, there's a lot of times movies leave you wanting more. And now especially with streamers and stuff, you've got bigger budgets, you've got bigger time frames, and you're not even on a like network episodic schedule anymore. You can really kind of free flow through like the stories that you want to tell, right?
To be fair, there's about 4 showrunners who can do that. Maybe 6 who have that kind of feature film budget and schedule. And most of the rest of us are still making TV. In fact, you may have seen some of the 1 billion articles about how there's a bit of a contraction in the business, and that there's an effort to be very financially responsible. And all that really means is that a lot of people are in a position to be making TV in the way that we used to make TV, where you do have to use, all of your creative power to make a very modest budget seem huge. The thing that's different, by the way, from, my early days on the CW is that there were just fewer shows that Supernatural could be compared to that had the opportunity to make an episode for $25 million. But I think, I don't even want to say like for better or for worse. I think just it is what it is, that I don't think you get graded on a curve. So when I was making The Magicians for a much more modest budget than a giant HBO fantasy show, they didn't put a little title card in front of The Magicians to say, you should be really impressed because they did this for so much less money. It just has to be good. It has to be good. I mean, audiences don't care. They're just like, I'm going to come to your show if your show is good, if it looks good, if it feels interesting to me. So yeah, the truth is there's a few of those. The Last of Us. And then the most of the rest of us are just making like kind of TV,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I do love that you bring up the CW there because, of course, as I told you at the beginning, Supernatural is where I first saw your name and everything. And that was a show that, like I was a huge into Smallville. Like that was my kind of, because I'm a comic book nerd, like, I have been my whole life. And I remember the reason I even went to Supernatural was because of Jensen Ackles, because he was on the season of Smallville right before Supernatural started. And I was like, okay, I liked this guy. Let's see what this is. And you're right. I love what you talked about, the snobbery and stuff, because that's a show where everybody would seem to be snobbish about it. Oh, it's another Supernatural show. It's like, ghost hunting. Haven't we seen this with X-Files? But the writing on that show is so fantastic, especially the way you play the dynamic between Sam and Dean. And it's just like, you can tell from all of your other series as well, all the writing that you've done, that is always a focus for you, is like really making these characters something we want to care about. Like, is that something that you've really focused on ever since your first scripts, like for Supernatural and stuff?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I mean, we all worked very hard on it. And when a writer takes an outline and goes off to write the script, that point, we will do anything to make it good. We will tell any personal story and put it in Dean's mouth. We will do anything. We just want to move you and make you sit on the edge of your seat. I hadn't written horror, broadly speaking, before I got that job. But when I was in the interview with Eric Kripke, the creator of the show, he started asking what horror movies I liked. And I realized that I had watched all of them, just all of them. When I was 12 years old, I had spent the summer in Canada with some cousins, not in the city. They had kind of a countryside house. And every day my aunt would take us to this thing called a video store. Used to exist. And there was a shelf that was all like 80s, 90s horror movies. And I just, over the course of that summer, I watched all of them. Yeah. And at that point, I realized, I didn't even think about it, but I really like this stuff. And the wonderful thing, the reason that horror is such a just graduate school for screenwriters is that it's all about evoking these really intense feelings in your audience with fairly limited resources. Yeah. And over the course of writing on Supernatural, Eric taught me a lot about how to make something scary just by suggesting something that's on the other side of the frame. And when those are the tools in your toolbox, when you can't answer every story problem by blowing up a spaceship because you can only do that once or twice a season, right? You have to instead, the way I talk about it now in the writer's room is that we're not going to solve this problem by going outwards, by expanding. We're going to solve this problem by going straight down into the character. And we're going to drill into this character psyche, and we're going to find something to be brought up in this scene that is a genuine revelation. Like they can't even believe it's coming out of their mouths. The person that they're saying it to is shocked. And then the audience feels like they have been given a huge gift in understanding something very deep about this character that they like. And that's what I learned to do writing that show. And it has always served me well. I feel like it will also serve me well when I'm writing a $200 million movie, because we love the gore and the spectacle, and we all love I love a dragon, but in the end, we want our hearts to be touched, and we want to feel a kinship with the character is going through on the screen.
Yeah, and I think that's completely right, because, as special effects have become better, as, the uncanny valley is starting to be conquered and such, it is still ultimately all about the characters. We have to care about what we're watching, right? Like, otherwise, who cares about the explosion? We have to care about who's in the radius there. And I continue to tell everyone, I was like, if you want, like some of the most perfect like arcs, like season 1 through 5 of Supernatural, I think is perfect television. Like no notes at all for seasons like 1 through 5 of Supernatural. And then, I tell them like there's like 15 seasons, so keep going. But, it's one of those things. It's just like, how does a show like that go 15 seasons? The writing and the characters just keep us and draw us in, and we want to see more. It's pretty simple. People like what they like, right?
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, well, and of course from that you continue kind of down the sci-fi thing when you went to The Magicians there. You talked briefly about that, but again, just a wonderful, wonderful show with amazing characters, amazing lore for nerds like me, but again, really drilling down into those characters. And I really appreciate that show because it went through such a kind of roller coaster when it came to like when the seasons were coming out and like what networks and stuff that it was on. Like, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how did you come to that property and just, the will to keep it going into that 4th season there, or the 5th season?
I was a huge fan of the novel. I had just picked it up because it seemed, a dirty grown-up American Harry Potter sounded great. Couldn't wait to read it. And at that time, I actually called my agent to see if it was available to develop, and of course it wasn't. So it had a couple of rounds of previous development that fell apart at some point in the process. I think in part because when you read the book, it does sound massive. It's almost unproducibly huge. And so maybe part of the reason that John McNamara and I succeeded in getting it over the finish line was because we wrote a more producible version of the series. But to me, personally, in a strange way, the opportunity to make The Magicians was a little bit in reaction to Supernatural, which I enjoyed writing every single script. I learned that was 100% my graduate school, not only as a TV writer, but also as a showrunner.
Yeah.
And when you are on the staff of a show that you haven't created, your job is to get as far inside the head of the creator as you possibly can. So it's a skill set that writers on staff have to be able to essentially very closely mimic the voice of the creator, the showrunner. And so I clearly understood why Eric was telling the story. And it's inarguable, the 15 seasons, as you said. It moved a lot of people. The story and the feelings he had about family, and also how he positioned the bad things that go bump in the night. And I'm just a different person than he is. And I had different life experiences. And so there were times when I was writing an episode where the procedure of the episode was that the ghost would be vanquished by the end. And I would just think to myself in passing, you know, I think like in real life, you can't really help ghosts.
Right.
I had a much darker view. I was like, they're probably real and they're probably just suffering. But that supernatural was not the place for that. And very happily so. But when we got into The Magicians, which was a different structure, it was much more about the coming of age of this ensemble of characters. I could write an episode where the characters discovered that a house was haunted by children who had been abused. And the end of the episode is, Alice just in tears because she realizes there's nothing she can do to release them from their torment. It's a lot darker. I think I reveal a lot about myself. But so it was this is the thing I always say to people who maybe aren't fantasy or science fiction fans. It's like, it's not one thing. It's actually a vast, it's like when you say fantasy, it's a planet. There are, and there are hobbits on this planet, and there's, Ted Chiang's speculative fiction. Some of it is on this planet. And so you can do basically a procedural, like Supernatural, where every week these brothers will shoot something in the face. And then the end of the episode will be about their relationship. And you can do a show like The Magicians, where magic is more of a metaphor for just the stuff in their life that allows them to express themselves or push themselves. But it rarely solves anything. It mostly just makes stuff worse.
Well, magic always does come with a price and all those properties, doesn't it? And again, though, you and I are so simpatico here. I guess because, you wrote it, you should be. But it is like one of those things. I always say this to people, when they learn about me, like my giant nerddom and stuff, and it's just like, why do you like the MCU and all this kind of stuff? It's like, guys, it's not about the action and all that stuff. There are rich stories being told here, especially from the source material. It's never about, Captain America is like punching somebody in the face. It's like the loneliness and the isolation that character feels, and how there's only like that kind of thing. That's always where I go with fantasy, and that's why I so appreciated and radiated toward not just Supernatural, but The Magicians, because you're right, there is just this expression, these inner turmoils that they have to deal with, and you're right, let's throw some magic with that, and how do you deal with any of that kind of stuff? There's always the metaphors that are being played with, right?
Exactly. I think not every writer would say that this is why they're writing stories like this, but it certainly is for me. And the joy of this being my job, like I get to write books off, on my taxes, is that I have read so many books written by psychologists about the meaning of fairy tales, why they exist, why we tell stories like this to children, because they're often quite violent, and what their purpose is. And it is a lot about processing things that scare us so hugely that we can't really look them in the eye. So, using a metaphor, placing them inside something that's fun to watch, but also doesn't feel like your dad or, someone from the country you have been told is the enemy or whatever that is, that it helps people be able to embrace the story and lean in instead of bracing. And part of that I always try to keep in mind, and including writing the show You, which doesn't have as many speculative elements, but does often wink to fairy tales and use those structures, is that part of the purpose of these stories is to do the opposite of tying things up in a bow for us. It's to tell us that you're right to feel that your life doesn't tie up in a bow. And that some things will go well and some things will go poorly, and the story keeps going. And that's what these stories are there for, to help you process things that are dark, scary, unfair, that you might be a little responsible for, all of the difficult things.
Yeah, well, transition right there to you. Let's talk about you, because I got to tell you, this is going to be a really fun part of the interview, because every time I say the name of the series, we're going to think I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
I imagine that's never happened before. But no, I actually was not resistant to watch the series, but it was always kind of like do I need to watch this? It was my wife that got me there. And from the very first episode, you just absolutely hooked me. And I was like, I need to watch all of this. It took me like 2 days to watch like all of the seasons, because there is just this emotional core at the center of this. You wouldn't think that you would get sympathy for somebody like Joe. You wouldn't think that you would feel stuff like this, but Penn Badgley's like performance in there, also the amazing Victoria Pedretti in the second and third seasons. You've got these very flawed, very broken characters that do things that should horrify us, yet we are still sitting there completely hanging on the edge of everything with them. Like, please talk to me just a little bit about, like, because I know it's based on a novel and stuff, but how did you visualize this coming to life, this story of telling it in a way that wasn't going to, like, creep us out, like, too much, if that makes sense?
Hopefully it creeps you out sometimes. I
think it does.
Even Penn Badgley looks a little bit creepy when he's hiding in the shadows, masturbating in the street, which is Act 1 of the pilot, right?
Exactly.
You have been trained from birth, really, to root for a character like Joe.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we play with who and what he really is by shooting the story the same way that some of the greats have shot romantic comedies.
Yeah.
We make sure it's a romance and a thriller at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And we try not to write him creepy. We justify everything he does to ourselves. Yeah. It's not as hard as you would think, because he's actually not as extreme as we would like to think. I mean, I personally would not stalk or kill, but I understand why he has that impulse. I understand how that wire got crossed for him. It's actually funny, because I've had so many conversations about him with Penn Badgley, and early on Penn, in season 1, when Penn was the most uncomfortable with this character that he was playing, where he said something about Joe doing something crazy, and I was like, well, it isn't just though Joe is unhinged. He makes perfect sense. And he was like, Sarah, Joe is totally unhinged. What are you talking about? It's like, oh, that's my writer brain talking. I have to sort of be in his shoes so that I can, and I think because we work so hard to do that, it pays off for the audience. It gives you permission to keep watching and enjoying what he's doing. We're not trying to tell you that serial killers are vastly different than the rest of us. We're saying he's the most extreme, unfortunate version of something that we actually have celebrated in tons of films.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember seeing an interview with Penn where he talks about like how, Joe probably views himself as like an old school, like hopeless romantic, and like, but there's just like things that happen that he reacts to and stuff like that. And I think one of the most brilliant things about this show is the voiceovers that we get, the narration that we get from him. And like, that was really what hooked me, because like the deadpan delivery of it too is just so matter of fact that it's just like, we're seeing like these extreme things take place. And then he's just sitting there like, oh, well, that's bad, and it's like, how like, is that something, because I haven't read the book, but is that something that's in the book, or was that something that like you came up with right there that was like a big focus of the show?
It's the book. The book is almost in second person. It's very unusual because it is so riding kind of the stream of Joe's thoughts. You're just inside his head. The first scene of the book is very similar to the first scene of the show. And it's about what he's thinking very honestly. And I've talked to Caroline Kepnes, the author, a lot about this. And she's a young woman. She was very young when she wrote it. And for her, it was a fun exercise to get in the head of some of the kind of person she's terrified of when she walks down the street. I mean, you can't know. Someone can look as thoughtful and harmless as Penn and be, you just don't. This is basically being a woman in a nutshell. And so, but it had this interesting effect of making me feel closer to him, even when he's saying something incredibly judgmental. I think judgmental things all the time, don't you?
Oh,
We just
yeah.
don't say them out loud. So it makes us feel like we're his special friend.
Yeah.
You know?
No, you're
a lot of
absolutely
the
right.
a lot of the development process with Greg Berlanti, who wrote the pilot with me, a lot of that was us trying to figure out how to maximize the voiceover. I think it's a useful fear of leaning on voiceover too much that all screenwriters carry around. There's a sort of conventional wisdom that it can be hacky, so you want to make sure you really earn it and justify it. And one of the smartest things that Greg came up with while we were writing is he called me and he said, I don't think we should write Joe and then put parenthetically VO, which is how you write a script when you're indicating that you're hearing someone's voiceover.
Right.
He said, I think there's a character called Joe's thoughts. And, it is Joe thinking, but we also need to just write it as Joe's thoughts so we can appreciate that it's separate and always use it in contrast to what is happening in the scene. So my favorite is when Joe says, hi, how are you doing? And somebody says, do you like my purse? And he thinks it's awful. It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And then he says, it's lovely. Right?
Yeah.
It's a tool to help us appreciate how much he lies, basically.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's a little trap door into like the true nature of it. And it also, I think, gives us, that, because then we don't have to explain it away somewhere else. We don't have to like have a conversation later where he's like, oh, I really did find that person ugly. It's just right there, and we get to live with him and be there with him in every single moment. And I think that deepens our commitment and our investment in him as a person, especially when, again, like a lot of the dramatic things start happening. And also what I really appreciate about how you write this show is that you do give morally gray moments there. We do have moments where we get to prototypically root for Joe, like when it comes to, his friend and her son who are in the abusive relationship and stuff. We get to appreciate his more violent tendencies there because that is something we would want to do, right?
Yeah. And I feel like if people look at Greg Berlanti and they wonder why he's Greg Berlanti, why he has been the most successful writer-producer of his kind in the history of television.
Yep.
Read the book and then watch the pilot and see what's different. And one of the things that's different is the existence of this character, Paco. Yeah. That was his incredible, I've never seen anything quite like it, just his understanding of what the elements that you need to put in to give a character longevity. And one of the things that really helps us understand Joe, he explained it to me that first day as like, look, we can't only have him, stalking this woman. We don't want him to be only using his power for evil. Right. Yeah. But also it is through this little boy that we're going to understand how Joe came to be. We're going to understand Joe's boyhood by seeing how he treats this boy in a bad situation. And he was absolutely right. I had nothing to do with it. I just was like, yes, that sounds great, and started writing it. And that is part of the template of the show now, that we realize that Joe is at his best around very young people who might need some help. And we twist it as things go on. Sure. But but it is one of the most enjoyable things to write about Joe.
And you're right. Like that also comes out, especially with, the Hendy storyline in season 2 there, when it's, again, trying to protect somebody from, a predator, which you would be justified, I guess, in calling Joe a predator of a sort.
Yes, you would.
He's definitely not, again, like it feels strange, doesn't it? To be like, there's a big difference between like Hendy and Joe. And it's like, well, I don't know. Is there? Well, yes, there is. I love the morally gray areas that we get to play with there. It's just like we root for him against somebody like that, but then he is still doing some pretty despicable things,
Well, he is a different kind of horrible. He's the kind of horrible that we think of as a knight on a white horse.
Yeah.
But we aren't confused for a minute about that. He's crossing the line. He shouldn't do those things. It comes from a really bad place inside of him. Often he's justifying things that are very clearly just what he wants to do, where his feelings were hurt, where his ego is involved. Yeah. But he tells himself that he is being a romantic hero, and he has the entire Western canon to back him up. And one of the challenges of the success of this show is that we've gotten to keep going. And so now we're all the way to season 4, and Joe is not a dumb guy, and he has blind spots, but there have been enough bad outcomes in a row with his love interests that we were asking ourselves how much more self-awareness we could infuse him with, because I think you would sort of start to give up on the show if he just kept repeating the pattern. So our challenge has gotten, I think the bar is higher now, where we have to give him moments of clarity about exactly who he is and what he's doing. And that's candidly, that's a harder show to write.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that kind of transitions us perfectly as season 4 is coming out. And, Joey's off to another new city, another love interest to chase here after a very extreme ending of season 3. You guys really pulled out the stops for that one. But so, without getting too spoilery here, of course we have the trailer and such, but what can we expect from this 4th season here, the first part of this 4th season here? And what, I don't know. Like I said, don't give too much away, but where are we finding Joe as he's in Paris, and what's going to be happening here?
Yeah, Netflix kept the cage from season 3, and that's where they'll put me.
Yeah, exactly.
Give any spoilers, but as you may know from seeing the trailer, he is in London. That's where he lands. He follows Marianne to Paris and then to London, and he assumes a new identity. He wants to just lay low and not make the same mistakes that he's been making. It does very much affect him that tragically his wife died, which is how he thinks of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And certainly that he had to give up his son to get away, and that there's a pattern, these women, and it's troubling. So he becomes a professor at a fictional college in London called Darcy College. Finally, he's teaching.
Yeah.
I thought, he's self-taught. He never went to college, but he's better read than pretty much anyone he ever talks to.
Yeah.
So it was very fun to get to put the books and the stories that he loves even more front and center. And so, long story short, he's not the only killer in London. And just when he is putting that away forever, another one catches sight of him. And this one might not have the same compunction. By the way, when I speak about this, I have to be careful not even to use the singular too much or gender. It's really hard to talk about. But it's a murder mystery whodunit, which is a really fun structure to put Joe in the middle of, where the reluctant detective in the case is the only one who can deeply understand, because he's done some of the same stuff. The idea underneath all of this for us is that we decided it was time to make Joe start to really face himself, and this is the way that he comes face to face with some of these justifications and bad behaviors and violence. And again, because it's outside of him, he can look at it and judge it, and then maybe start to think about what he has done.
Yeah.
Just a little.
Here's hoping. I mean, and it's one of those, I just love your description of that, of putting him in the middle of a mystery he has to solve, because he's often the one who's making mysteries for everyone else. I absolutely love that there. And so also in London, I'm getting images of Jack the Ripper and stuff like that.
Yes, so are we.
That's where I'm going. Yeah, that was an influence for you?
The vibe is suitable for a serial killer. Lovely as that city is, it does have a checkered past in that way. And also just the idea that he is so far from home, and that he's surrounded mostly by people who are not American. So there is don't be fooled by the fact that nominally we speak the same language as the British. It is a very different culture. And so we got to play with that a little bit. We stuck an American or two in the mix, because we didn't create the show this season just to take pot shots at Europeans. That would be crazy. I mean, the sweet spot for judgment remains Americans. So we get to do that even this season.
Well, we got so much great of that in season 3 with just the insufferable people of LA and stuff like that.
These insufferable people have titles and old money and, never just, they're on a different level from that group in Madre Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am looking so forward to it. February 9th, everyone. Netflix, it's You, part 1 here of the season. The first 5 episodes, I believe. And then I believe the next 5 come out March 9th. So we're getting a month in between, which I like. I like that you're making us wait there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a mid-season cliffhanger. Say again?
Was that kind of structured that way? Like when you were writing it, like you wanted kind of like a half season?
It is something that Netflix came to talk to us about in the middle of everything. We had already broken the season, but per this conversation, Greg and I are kind of old school TV writers. We had written a really intense mid-season cliffhanger. The season does divide very neatly in half. And part of it is that I don't like to make you wait for all of the answers. I like to solve at least some of it in the first half. And so I'll say this, you can play along with the murder mystery, or you can just enjoy Joe in increasingly terrible situations. But I think that there are rewards for people within the first half. And then we leave you on a tantalizing note that hopefully will be worth just being patient for a couple of weeks until the next one comes. Yeah.
Yes. I love it. I love every part of it. All right. Well, Sera Gamble, thank you so much for joining us today on the Front Row Network on NPR Illinois. Talk about you, season 4, your career, everything. We are such big fans of you here, and we just really, really appreciate your time. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you. This was so fun.